Hello and welcome to What the Tech from Boast, where we talk with some of the brilliant minds behind new and exciting tech initiatives to learn what it takes to tackle technological uncertainty and eventually change the world. I'm Paul Davenport, Boast resident tech journalist, and today I am thrilled to welcome Dr. Ty McKinney, founder of 8-Bit Cortex. Ty brings a unique lens to the innovation economy that's grounded in neuroscience and a deep understanding of how burnout silently drains revenue, productivity, and innovation capacity from growing companies. At 8-Bit Cortex, Ty and his team have developed frameworks that quantify what they call the burnout tax, the hidden costs organizations pay when their leadership, operations, and innovation teams aren't working at full capacity. For leadership, that tax shows up as money left on the table when teams can't visualize clear paths to revenue growth. For operations, it manifests as absenteeism and presenteeism that kills productivity. And for innovation teams, it translates directly into delayed product launches, increased bugs, higher churn, and slower scaling of ARR. What makes Ty's work particularly relevant to the R&D and innovation funding conversation is this. Companies invest significant resources into R&D tax credits and government programs to fuel their innovation. But if their teams are burnt out, that capital gets wasted. The people executing the R&D aren't supported properly, which means delayed timelines, compromised quality, and ultimately fewer qualifying activities to claim in the next funding cycle. It's a vicious cycle that Ty is working to break through data-driven burnout management, science communication, and strategic benefits deployment. Ty is also a passionate advocate for creating workplaces where authenticity isn't just tolerated but celebrated, particularly for LGBTQ plus professionals in tech and innovation. His work with organizations like Alberta Queer Chamber of Commerce and Queer Tech demonstrates how inclusive, psychologically safe environments directly correlate with better business outcomes and stronger innovation capacity. Without further ado, welcome to the show, Ty.
Oh, thank you very much. That was a very warm introduction. I feel like you did have the podcast on my behalf.
My pleasure. Like we had said on our previous call where we first got to know each other, I could start recording the podcast immediately just because so much of what you do touches not even ancillary on what we are doing here at Boast, but directly when we're trying to support these teams. So I got excited working on that intro. Glad to hear that you're a fan of it as well. But yeah, I just did a lot of talking. I am excited to turn it over to you, Ty, to kick things off. So I know that we mentioned the burnout tax when we started talking about it, and what you've developed at 8-Bit Cortex that's unique to anything else that I've really seen specifically tied to the innovation economy. So you've broken it down into three categories, like I mentioned. It's leadership, operations, and innovation. Can you walk us through what each of those looks like, just in more detail than what I gave in that quick little explainer at the top?
Yeah. So it was a number of years ago, I was talking with an investor, and he was saying that every successful tech startup has three key roles: a hipster, a hacker, and a hustler. Where the hipster more or less translates over to the leadership, the CEO, the person who's responsible for setting the vision, the brand, and executing setting the strategy to make sure that it's executed to bring in the revenue goals. Um, and you've also got operations, the hustler, the person that makes sure all those box gets checked, so then that way you're meeting your deliverables. And in the case of shred claimants, making sure that you're getting all those R&D tasks accomplished. And then the final one, the hacker, obviously that's the most tech savvy one, but that's the person or the team that makes the technology do what it needs to in order to drive growth and productivity and all that excitement, innovation. And you need those three roles all working effectively together in order to really bring a company to the market and for it to scale. However, burnout will compromise the integrity of each of those components if the key people involved are susceptible to it. So, going to the leadership. Again, their primary goal is to bring in revenue, whether that's through sales, whether that's through non-dilutive grant funding, whether that's through capital raises. Their goal is to basically visualize what is the company going to look like in the next 1 to 5 years and ensure that the revenue is collected in order to do that. And I can say from personal experience in that particular role, if you got burnout, you don't quite meet those goals, and instead you end up realizing that there was some money left on the table. When we did this analysis internally, I realized in 2025 I left at minimum $16,000 on the table in my personal burnout task as relates to the organization. Um, on the operations side, again, every company is going to have the leadership and the operations. The operations is all about efficiency. So it's like, okay, you have deliverables that you need to execute, but if you're being honest with yourself, you probably could have delivered them slightly more efficiently. So this is where those ideas of absenteeism and presenteeism come into place. Every time that somebody is not able to show up to work in their full capacity and it takes them 25% longer to execute a task, the company is still paying for their time, but the productivity is reduced. And in Canada, we have a per capita recession, meaning that our productivity is a really critical variable that we're trying to improve in that regard. And then finally, what is most relevant for I imagine your audience is the hackers, the R&D team. Um, because again, the idea behind a tech company is that you've got your leadership building that vision, you've got operations executing, but the technology that's being developed, in theory, should be adding that extra value add and scaling and making things more automated in the future. And hopefully, the revenue goes from service based to automatic recurring revenue. So more or less, if you've got burnout on your tech team and your R&D team, they're not going to be as effective at developing and deploying the technology that's going to then really drive business growth over the forthcoming years. So that one's the probably the hardest to conceptualize because it's all about future growth in that sense. And again, our team had some burnout over the course of the last year, and it resulted in again, our technology not developed nearly as quickly as we were hoping over the last year. And now we're looking and working with professional software developers to try to alleviate some of that burnout tax on our team, in order to again reallocate resources more efficiently.
I love how you put all of that. So first, going back to the beginning, I chuckled when you said hustler, hipster, hacker, and hustler, just because I feel like I've been called all of those at different times in my career, but I've never truly been the hacker at the very least. I'm on the marketing side, so I see where I might fit into that hipster and hustler role. I especially like the hustler one, but all to say, I think that really characterized the three different buckets that you outlined perfectly. It makes it peanut butter and jelly because you can really understand too. It's just like, okay, who's doing the advocacy? Who's actually getting the work done? And then who is innovating and applying those efficiencies and those automations that you need ultimately at the end of the day? Hipster, hustler, hacker. Love that. Another point that I
Yeah.
want to go, yeah. And again, another thing that I think goes beyond all of that too. I'm glad that you said there's like a per capita recession. I could go long on a separate podcast because I want to hear your take on what we mean when we say that, because we've been having conversations this week. Clearly, something's in the air. We did a webinar on Tuesday where we were talking with our friends from Eugenie HR and HealthWise Benefits. And then yesterday, I actually recorded a podcast with the news from Backstretch, who helps us actually with a lot of our staffing. And so he knows, again, on the front lines, like what we're talking about here when we're saying a lot of that. And I'm hearing something very similar from all of them, but if you could maybe a tangent that we didn't plan for, talk a little bit about how you would characterize that per capita recession, just to maybe give me some context to apply it to the other conversations I've been having this week.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really important tangent to go down. Um, so basically, if you think about the productivity of a firm, there's certain deliverables and metrics that you'd want to achieve. For the tech company, it might be the number of users onboarded, or the number of clients that are onboarded, or the churn rate. So again, you can kind of think about it a little bit more tangibly that way. And again, thinking about the relationship with the operations team. The per capita recession basically means that on an individual personal level and at the company level, Canadian companies just aren't delivering as much output. It's a little easier to think about in more of a manufacturing kind of context where, there's widgets coming off the assembly line, but software development follows, broadly the same principles in terms of, features that are being deployed in that sense and the value that's created. And it seems like a lot of Canadian companies have fallen behind our American counterparts in that regard. So the question is, well, how do we address that per capita recession? Um, and honestly, I think like tech and innovation is one of the ways that we're going to be able to do that most effectively. Because the issue with burnout is that, again, it's going to limit your operations team to be able to go through and do the different things that it needs to, and it's hormone based, not neurotransmitter based. So that means you can't just white knuckle your way through burnout the same way that you can, a scary board meeting per se. It doesn't quite work out. You actually have to take time to rest and relax and allow your brain and body to have those hormone systems reset, and then you start to get that recovery from burnout. Well, it's hard to reconcile increased productivity while simultaneously taking more time off to rest. So that's where I think technology kind of addresses that key gap. Whereas if you can have technology improving the productivity of the operations team, again, at an individual or company level, then there is a pathway for both those things to happen at the same time. Yeah, there's a few different threads to juggle, but again, like how can we use technology to not replace humans, but augment humans so that individual person is more effectively managing workloads?
I think you phrased that perfectly, and actually a couple I'm not gonna keep us on this tangent for too much longer, but a couple thoughts came to mind while you were saying that. A lot of another, to abuse jargon, term that came up in my conversations this week was around unit economics and just basically how AI, going straight to that conversation around innovation and helping with that per capita recession and that eventually being the solve. With AI, it's changing the unit economics fundamentally, just in terms of like the people you need on your team. But I love that you brought that back to the human realities of what that actually means. So, yes, you might have a few less people on your team who now are enabled with superpowers in AI and new tools that can help them work smarter. But at the end of the day, like you said, it does come back to being a hormonal thing. And you can't just white knuckle your way through it. So, while, yeah, there's a lot on the tech front and the innovation side that can help the unit economics address that per capita recession that we're talking about here. You can't throw out the baby with the bathwater. You got to make sure that those
Yeah.
people who are still there are actually supported and able to like flex those muscles and deploy those superpowers. So, yeah, thank you for going on the tangent with me. And again, we'll have a lot more to discuss on that front, but I really like that you raised that point because it's of a theme with so much of what we're talking about today and so much that needs to be considered in this kind of new normal when we're talking about innovation and R&D. Now, for my next question, when we were again talking earlier about your expertise and getting to know each other. You said you could nerd out on neuroscience, and I want to give you the floor to dig a little deeper into that. So, this is your chance. What's happening in the brain when someone is experiencing burnout, and how does that directly affect their ability to execute on innovation work in particular?
Yeah. So basically, there's three main components of burnout we've identified at the physiological level. The first one is chronic exhaustion. So again, we're all used to feeling tired. I actually did a talk last week where I made the joke: if you wake up in the morning and want to go back to bed, that's probably a sign that you should go back to bed because your body needs a little bit of rest, even though that's probably not practical advice in many cases. Um, but as humans, we were designed to experience stress in the short term. And hunting down that gazelle on the African savannah, escape a tooth tiger, those sorts of things, to a field for several hours. So there's a concrete stressor, then you're done with the stressor and life moves on and you have a chance to rest. But that's not how modern day society, especially in the startup world, is structured. Again, like in tax season is coming up, the federal fiscal year end. So basically, everyone that has a workload synchronized to that March 31st deadline is going to be going through some degree of collective burnout. And again, that's a month or more of chronic stress that isn't going to be easily resolved. And our body struggles to process those kinds of stress experiences. So, first thing that is to happen with chronic exhaustion is that your stress response system going to get dysregulated. How it gets dysregulated kind of depends on your situation and the trauma that you've experienced, and other complicating factors. But the take message is that either you're going to have a challenging situation that you cannot rally the resources to motivate yourself and properly deal with, or you're going to be in this overstressed, very anxious state of where you're frozen like you're in the headlights and not really executing on anything. So that kind of step one is that chronic exhaustion piece where again your body just starting to get its hormones a little out of balance, and there is not an alignment between what you need to do and what your brain and your body feels like it's prepared to do. Um, the second component is this idea of cognitive inefficacy. Basically, those stress hormones interfere with particular brain networks that allow us to do focus work. Filter out distractions, be able to juggle between tasks, paying attention to detail. Um, those are all really important functions of a network that's kind of right up around here on the top and a little bit more to the forward. And if that network's not performing well, then you're just not going to be as efficient at doing whatever tasks professionally or in broader life that you need to do. So then that, again, reduces your productivity, as we're just saying. And that also has the negative psychological downside if you kind of feel a little more crappy, because again, you're literally not doing your job as well, and you often have some degree of awareness of that. So you get a lot of self doubt that comes in, a lot of anxiety. And then the final piece, which is usually the last piece, usually they kind of come in this sequence, is a sense of cynicism. So that network that's really important for regulating our focus is also really important for regulating our emotions, and therefore is really important for our connections with other people. Um, so it's one thing to not like your coworkers or to be irritated by your clients, but in certain industries and sectors, that can actually be very, very damning. Like if you think about a health tech company, oftentimes clinical practitioners are a key asset that is being deployed as part of that innovation strategy. And if they're burnt out and not particularly caring what their patients are saying, well, that's going to negatively affect everybody involved in that transaction. So that helps illustrate again how that sense of cynicism and not being able to maintain those human relationships effectively really can degrade overall effectiveness. So that's what's happening in the body when each of as you're going through those different stages of burnout. And then it's just a question of like, okay, well, how does that translate to your role within the company? And going back to the first part of our conversation, which balls are getting dropped, and how much does it cost the company?
Absolutely. I'm just jotting down again, that translates to your role within the company, and I think too, something that you alluded to, but maybe wasn't unspoken, but that I really took from that too, was it all does tie back to that there are different personality types, and you need to
Mhm.
kinda steel yourself for I don't wanna say patience, but I was thinking about that cynicism and how you ran through some examples, and I'm like, "Wow, I'm being read to filth," just because I've been in that mode where I am burnt out and I'm just viewing everything through that cynical lens. I'm like, "Okay, I've been on since 7 AM and I have a call at 4:30, and it's through no fault of the person who I have to talk to at 4:30. I'm already hating them for what they're doing to the fact that I know that I wanna go take a nap and I still have to be on. This isn't a real life scenario today, but in the past, I've been in
Yeah.
that mode, and I never put together that I am burnt out. I should probably have just gone back to bed and not taken my call at 7:30 because that's setting me up for failure the rest of the day. I'm not able to juggle how I deal with the hacker, the hustler, the hipster, but also just anybody in any role. And I think in tech specifically, because there's so many different kinds of personalities that you need to bring together to work synchronously to actually build a business, build a product, build an innovation, you gotta be able to give yourself that grace that you can give to other people, which I think is huge. I also love that you alluded to in broader life too. I mean, like, sure, we all wanna make sure that we're bringing our best selves to work, but I'm eventually gonna resent my coworker, or resent my employer if I'm constantly thinking about how angry I am at work while I'm supposed to be enjoying my personal life, or I'm supposed to be my authentic self off air. So I just want to emphasize that again, I saw myself in a lot of what you said, and it's not an indictment on Boast by any means, but I think just it's something that we all can find ourselves in, being members of the workforce, being adults in 2026, honestly,
It's corporate culture in North America. Like, I mean,
completely.
it's hard for us to kind of, re-steer that ship, but I think that, there's a lot to be gained if we can, do that re-steering process.
Absolutely. Now, I think we alluded to my next point that I was going to bring up around R&D investment versus people investment. I think we kind of just talked through why even for there to be success in R&D, you need to make sure that you're getting the right people set up so that they can have grace for themselves and grace for others in these roles that they're bringing. But you got to make that case to people who have the actual budgets. And again, the whole theme of the webinar that we did on Tuesday this week was about, let's say you get your shred funding, let's say you get your R&D tax credits. The instinct is to push that all into either extending runway or buying more materials or just building, building, building more. But the case we were making was put some of that into your people, put that into your strategy or your talent. Could you maybe talk about like more fuel we can put on that fire, or maybe like how you would make
Yeah.
that claim to people? Yeah.
No, 100%. So I can actually draw upon some of my personal experience for that. So as I mentioned, 2025 was not the best year in terms of burnout management for me. And it was in the fall we got a better benefits package. Which is again atypical for a startup of our size. But again, coming from my health background, I knew that it's important to take care of the health of our people. So, I was working with a naturopathic doctor that's very data driven, and we did a steroid hormone test and a food sensitivity test. And turns out my diet was causing me systemic inflammation. Turns out I should not be eating eggs and dairy, which, I love cheese and I was eating eggs daily. So, like, I mean, that's systemic inflammation from diet that interferes with those brain networks that I was talking about. It's going to make other symptoms of chronic health conditions, a little bit more challenging. But I think perhaps what was most impactful was from that steroid hormone test. It became apparent that my sleep was being disrupted. Um, so interestingly, I've looked at the research on this. People don't explicitly associate sleep disruptions with burnout cognitively, explicitly, but the link is there subconsciously. So this is kind of going on in the background. Basically, your cortisol, your stress response is supposed to be very high in the morning, and then it slowly trails down as the day goes on. So then that way, when it comes to the evening, you're got low cortisol, you fall asleep, and then around 2 in the morning, you start to get a little bit of a bump in cortisol to start preparing your body for waking up again. And that's kind of a natural cycle that we have over the 24 hours. So what happens when you're in an extreme state of burnout is you don't get a sine wave. Instead, it's more flat or it's a reduced sine wave. So you wake up really stressed, but you're not able to properly utilize it. In the last few hours of sleep, that's when we do REM sleep. So again, processing all of our emotions, processing all of our memories, so that it helps out with our learning and memory capacity, ability to learn new information. So that gets compromised. There's one hormone enzyme called aromatase that basically takes testosterone and converts it over to estrogen, and that is really active in that last phase of sleep. And again, if you're stressed out, going to sleep, or you're bringing that burnout exhaustion experience with you, then that gets interrupted as well. So basically, you can be in a position where you don't have enough testosterone for either men or women. Again, the hormone that allows us to feel good from doing challenging things, really important in terms of, being able to push through a challenging workday. That's a really important hormone for being able to do that in addition to all the physical recovery that comes along with it. And to anyone that is struggling with addiction as a potential consequence, when that aromatase enzyme is really hyperactive and you've got lots of estrogen in your body, that actually fuels dopamine reward based signaling, which makes addiction risk even bigger. So, more or less, if you don't have your hormones balanced out at an individual level, it's not only going to compromise your work quality, but it's going to compromise your long-term health quality as well. So again, the strategic investment on our end in order to get benefits and understand how burnout was playing out in myself, and my team could talk about their experiences separately in that regard. But that's really important for being able to think about, okay, how do you do this more sustainably as a person? 'Cause again, it's not just how do I get through this next day? It's like, I wanna be doing my job for years to come, and I can't do that if I'm, not able to have a sustainable, pace. So again, really trying to find ways to restructure your lifestyle so then that way, all the things are supporting your goals rather than, fighting against this inertia of the burnout.
I love that. I think a piece of jargon that we use and abuse on this show is R&D tax credits unlock a virtuous cycle in terms of like, okay, if you set yourself up on the right strategy to be able to document the R&D that you're doing, the innovation that you're doing, and then establish workflows that make that rewarding so that you can claim the R&D tax credits that you deserve every year, yada,
Yeah.
yada. It's exactly what you're outlining, but for your personal health and for those teams, and making sure that, again, you're establishing something that you're not gonna burn out these people. I'm oversimplifying in a big way everything you just said, but again, it's gotta be at a sustainable pace. It's gotta be something that isn't gonna just burn you through in the same way that you would burn through your runway. Your people are your runway if we're gonna get really cynical about it and talk about, in business terms, what is at stake here. So that is cool. Now, talking a bit about 8-Bit Cortex and what you're doing to help address all of this, you're launching a burnout management self-paced program with gamification elements. Can you tell me a little bit about what this actually is and maybe what is it going to look like in actual practice and some of the maybe roles and titles who are going to actually benefit most from what you're proposing here?
Yeah. So, as part of our community engagement over the last several years, I've done lots of lunch and learns, happy hour talks, panel discussions, again on burnout management, often from that inclusive corporate workplace angle. So this is really condensing those several years of experience into a self-paced course that, again, to your point, helps people firstly identify what is their burnout risk, but then second, understand what are the personal factors that they need to manage in relation to managing that burnout risk. So one super straightforward example I think a lot of people can appreciate is introversion versus extroversion. Um, if you're burnt out and you're an introvert, you want to go home and listen to some music and read a book, and that's going to recharge your batteries. If you're an extrovert, you're going to want to go out and hang out with some friends and maybe do some dancing, and that's going to recharge your batteries. If you force people to do the opposite of that, then you're going to come up with some challenges. So again, understanding what is the right pathway to sustainable recovery for you, and making sure that you can manage those risks accordingly. Um, so in relation to, like, introversion, extroversion, having like a hybrid work policy is really helpful. Again, I am always shocked by how much software developers like to not be social. But that works for them. They enjoy, that kind of an environment. Whereas again, a sales or an operations team, leadership, they tend to enjoy being in person more. So again, making sure that there's flexibility within company policy to be able to let people work in a way that aligns best with them. Um, Another really important factor to consider is neuroticism or sensitivity to stress. Some people are just more sensitive to stress than other people, and we would think that's a bad thing, but it's actually not. It's just human nature. Like, I pay my accountant to be anxious on my behalf so that the CRA doesn't come after me. Um, you know, I yeah, I pay lawyers to be anxious about the, low probability, high risk situations that I can't be bothered to think about, but would be really expensive if I didn't think about at least once and have some language to protect the company. Um, so yeah, so this self-paced burnout course is going to a burnout management course again is going to help people understand what their individual risk is, identify some of those personal factors, including sleep hygiene. So then that way they can be set up for success in terms of managing their personal burnout load. And then if a whole team is engaging in that, then the idea it's like you're going to be aligning people's individual stress management goals with the R&D goals of the firm. And again, as you said, it creates that virtuous cycle. So then that way, the more sustainable productivity approaches are driving the R&D. You're getting more activities that can count under the shred claim, and then the company grows.
I love that, and you're enabling basically to meet people where they're at, which I think is incredible. I don't wanna bring it back to me yet again, but I'm thinking about, like, how I used to be an in-office person. If you met me pre-pandemic, basically, it would have been a very different Paul than you get, today, and I think people assume again, just because I love hopping on the camera, I love chatting, I love meeting people at events, but I do think I have a little bit more of an introverted side. I was really able to flourish when I was given the opportunity to work from home and also do the travel that I want to do on the terms that I want to do it, but that was still productive for my company and effective in my
Mhm.
role. So, like, I don't know anyone who has the kind of exact role that I have at Boast today, but it works for me so well. And I'm glad that it works for the company too. But it took a lot of learning and a lot of introspection and a lot of self-evaluation to be like, "Okay, to your point, I gotta turn off at the end of the day." I was like,
Yeah.
I need to go read, I need to go chill, listen to some music, literally do some dishes, do some laundry. I just like some alone time to process my thoughts, and then I go for a walk around the lake near my house here in Boston. Um, at the same time, though, sometimes it does switch up. When I'm at events, it is actually a release to go talk with my coworkers, hang, and just like chill. Like we can go to a bar after we finished everything for the day and we've been doing all the schmoozing and we can just kind of be real with each other. But that's the other thing too. It's variable. There's no one size fits all, so you need to meet folks where they're at. So, yeah, I just again really resonated with everything that you just put up there, and I'm very happy that again you're giving people the path to figure it out for themselves and then get something that works for them, which is so cool. Now, again, I know we're pushing at time, but I do want to get to
Yeah.
this next point. You're doing a lot of important work around authenticity in the workplace, particularly for the LGBTQ plus community. So tell me a little bit about some of that work that you're doing. And again, how does psychological safety and the ability to show up authentically? So not even just getting like that self-preservation care, but also just being yourself at work. Like, tell me about the importance of that, what you're finding in the research that you've done, and how you're helping support that.
Yeah. So, at a very basic level, when a queer person shows up into work and they're not able to be their authentic self, and I like to differentiate between authentic self and dysregulated self, because some people think that, they just show up and, say anything and everything that comes to mind that, that's being authentic. Whereas, like, no, like being measured is also part of being authentic. But again, like being coming up as your measured authentic self. That's, there's a lot of creativity and a lot of innovation that can come from that. Whereas if you are not able to do that, you're basically, adding on a basic degree of burnout risk. So the physiological process is referred to as expressive suppression. Basically, if you have a strong emotion, anxiety related to a board meeting, tension with how an agile meeting went, something along those lines, and you're not able to express it and you suppress it instead and just pretend that emotion doesn't exist, the brain remembers, so that emotion is going to come back later more strongly, and you're going to get an increase in your sympathetic nervous system, which then is going to drive that feeling of chronic stress. So more or less, if you don't have a workplace where people feel like they can be their authentic selves in a professional setting, then you're by default incurring burnout risk on all those people. So with the Alberta Queer Chamber of Commerce and Queer Tech, they're developing some programming to again help queer entrepreneurs and queer-owned businesses be able to implement AI, inclusive HR practices, and those other sorts of things again in order to try to drive business growth. And our contribution towards that is going to be thinking about, your brain on pride. What is the burnout tax that is created when workers aren't able to be fully present and authentic in that capacity. Because again, that'll just make everything else we've been talking about worse. So since June is going to be Pride Month, that's when we're going to be launching a version of this self-paced burnout management course, specifically designed for queer people to help them, identify how they can show up at work most effectively and leverage their creative assets. Because again, it's all about how can we leverage our assets and not have our strengths, or sorry, not let our challenges hold us back.
Yeah, and I love that you alluded to it, but it's just like it's something that it impacts everyone around you too. So like if you're feeling those constraints personally and you're not able to be your best self at work, even if it's unspoken, others are going to pick up on that. And
Yeah,
yeah,
that
again,
cynicism is contagious.
It really is. And Ty, again, I feel like I'm being read here. It's fantastic what you're doing just because, again, I felt all of this personally, and I know so many people who are in this audience and also who I just know one on one. Goes back to, again, like, I didn't love working in an office where it was very bro forward and we were a lot of sales guys in there. And I'm like, well, I'm the one marketing guy and I have a completely different philosophy about work in general, let alone my personal life or who I'm going to be bringing to work. And it's growing pains, it's evolution, but this is a resource that hasn't always been there, and I'm very excited to hear that you're helping steer ahead a way for people to have access to this kind of self-eval that they can do to make sure that they're getting a program and a strategy and also an understanding and an acknowledgement too. The more you can know what's actually going on there, it's very relieving to have some of the answers to. I'm like, "Oh, so this is why my career took this pivot when it did," or I made this decision and I was like, where did that come from? Okay, it's because subconsciously or even consciously, I've been carrying all this weight with me and I haven't addressed it or taken it off my shoulders. So, yeah, I'm rambling at this point. But again, June is when a lot of this is going to be launching. It's in time for Pride Month. It's explicitly geared towards LGBTQ plus individuals, but it's for anybody to bring the best selves to work, correct?
No, 100%. Again, one thing that I find very interesting about the queer community is that it's very intersectional by nature. So again, like a lot of the challenges that are faced by queer professionals are also faced by racialized minorities, indigenous people in the workplace, people that are neurodiverse or otherwise have some sort of a disability in the workplace. So again, a lot of those challenges are present in different capacities. And when I think about the leaders that I most respect and admire, they have a very they're very emotionally intelligent in the sense that they understand themselves. They've done that self-reflection work. And so as a result, they understand what they're good at, what they're not good at, and by extension, what they need to get support with, and how to effectively leverage, the team and resources around them in order to deliver goals. So again, the more that we can get people thinking about that self-reflection, am I actually burnt out? Since as humans, we kind of suck at being able to identify that in advance.
I'm so happy you raised that point. Yeah. Of the many things that we kind of suck at as humans, I think that's one of the top pieces. But yes, I love that. All right. So we alluded to it, but I need to ask, looking ahead, what are you most excited about for 8 Bit Cortex? I know we got this big launch in June. It's going to time up for Pride Month, but anything else on the calendar? Any initiatives, any partnerships other than working with Boast that you want to give a shout out to?
Yeah. So again, I think this initiative of doing the self-paced burnout management course, again, specifically focusing on R&D focused companies, that's one of the main things that we're going to be working on over the next few months. But we're also working with publicly funded nonprofit organizations in order to help them do a social return on investment analysis to help demonstrate to their public funding stakeholders the economic value of their programs and so they can use that in order to better advocate for funding. So all that we've been talking about is how our technology is applicable on the private sector side, internal within a company, but the same technology can be used within the public sector as well in order to help make decisions around resource allocation. So it's been very exciting to get to work with some of those organizations on a more face-to-face basis, and we're excited to be launching basically a more automated version of this SROI analysis. So then that way, nonprofits and charities across Canada can do a much better job of demonstrating how they're helping leverage public sector resources for the public good. Again, addiction recovery, trauma recovery, and gainful employment is usually one of the end goals of that process. So again, helping support people from, their rock bottom, so to speak, to the point where they've got meaningful employment, they've got benefits and resources to manage their health challenges, and they feel a sense of purpose in the workplace, so that they're sustainably not going to run into burnout. So again, trying to help people and organizations go all the way along that spectrum. So we mostly focused at the very end of the spectrum, but again, also working with the charitable sector and social services to move people along up until that point.
I love that. And again, like it's meeting them where they're at so they can all ultimately feel that sense of purpose. And so many more deliverables beyond that, but I just love how you framed that at the end there, Ty. So I really can't thank you enough. So Ty, this has been incredibly insightful. And again, from the neuroscience of burnout to the very real business case for investing in your people alongside your R&D initiatives, I can't thank you enough. So for anyone listening, Ty, where can we find you? I'm going to put your details and your contact in the show notes, but let's say it live for anybody who's not looking on their computers.
Yeah, so website is www.8bitcortex.com, number 8, bitcortex.com. My personal email is ty@8bitcortex.com. And I'm always interested in having conversations with organizations where they recognize that this is a challenge in some capacity and would like to work towards developing a solution. Because that's how a lot of these partnerships start up. Sometimes organizations have a training program where they just need some data to help validate it. Um, Sometimes they need a little bit of guidance themselves in terms of advisory or coaching. So, whatever the challenge is, we want to make sure that Impact Core, the platform that we're launching, will be an accessible resource to all types of organizations to again align that productivity and economic development goals with just compassion for humans and making sure that we do work inclusively and sustainably.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's all got to come back to humans. I think yeah,
Yeah.
we're flooded with the AI conversation on this podcast, but I'm very happy that this week it's worked out that we're really focused on making sure we don't lose our humanity in all of what we're doing. And that, again, we don't misunderstand what the goal of all this is. We want to support each other. We all want to feel that sense of purpose and we want to be working on things that satisfy that goal. So happy that you're making that. So happy that you're building this again for a wide swath of people too. While there, of course, is the focus on helping support those in the R&D and innovation space, that's the Boast piece of it all. I'm so happy to hear that you're actually making it available to the larger community of humans. So, Ty, I cannot thank you enough. So happy that you're going to be working with Boast going forward. Again, I'll have all the contact information in the show notes. But, folks, thank you so much for joining us for this fantastic episode.